I asked Stacy, do you remember which glass it was that you poured the cranberry juice in? And she looked at it and said, well, when I poured the antifreeze, and then she stopped and said, I mean the cranberry juice.
Like she realizes what she's just said.
Detectives had a theory, but they had almost nothing to prove it. So they brought Stacey Castor into a room, set down 2 glasses recovered from her husband's deathbed, and asked her a simple, almost gentle question. Which one had held the cranberry juice? She began to answer, and in the middle of that answer, one word came out that did not belong there. Antifreeze. She caught it instantly and corrected herself, but it was already said. To the detective sitting across from her, that single slip was the moment the floor gave way, the moment the careful story she had told for 2 years stopped holding. This is the story of how a woman buried 2 husbands, was praised as a devoted mother, and very nearly got away with all of it. It is also the story of the daughter she tried to leave behind to take the blame. Stacey Ruth Castor lived in Clay, New York, a suburb just north of Syracuse, the kind of place where neighbors waved and nothing much happened. She was born in the summer of 1967. By her late 30s, she had built a life that, from the outside, looked entirely ordinary and entirely earned. She worked for years as an ambulance dispatcher, the calm voice on the other end of someone's worst moment, and later moved into office work, managing the books for a local heating and air conditioning business. She was a mother of 2 daughters. She had been widowed once and remarried. To the people around her, she was unlucky in some ways and resilient in others, a woman who kept going. Those who knew her described her as quick, capable, and composed under pressure, traits that made sense for someone who spent years fielding emergency calls, who knew how to stay steady when other people fell apart. That composure would eventually turn into one of the most telling things about her. At her first husband's funeral, people noticed she didn't cry. After her second husband's death, she gave an account so orderly, so consistent, that the initial investigation found almost nothing to pull at. She performed grief the way she seemed to perform most things, without visible seams. It held for a while. Then it didn't. What almost no one saw was the pattern underneath. Over the course of a decade, the men closest to Stacey Castor died suddenly, mysteriously, and in nearly identical ways. The deaths were ruled natural or self-inflicted. The paperwork was signed. Life moved on. It would take a stubborn detective, a forensic pathologist, and an act so cold it stunned a veteran judge, before anyone connected the dots that had been sitting in plain sight the whole time. The first husband was Michael Wallace. Stacy met him when she was still a teenager, in the mid-1980s, and they married at the start of the 1990s in a small ceremony at her parents' home. They had 2 daughters together, Ashley and Bree. By every account, it was a normal marriage with normal strains. Michael was, by the descriptions of those who knew him, larger than life, the life of the party, generous to a fault, a man who would hand you whatever he had if you needed it. He was also at times a difficult man, with a long struggle with drinking. He worked nights as a mechanic. Stacy worked days as an ambulance dispatcher. They lived paycheck to paycheck, and for stretches, barely saw each other, passing in the bedroom for a few hours, on opposite shifts of the same exhausting week. There was one fault line inside the family that mattered later. Michael was, by several accounts, devoted to the younger daughter, Bree. She could do no wrong in his eyes, while his bond with the elder, Ashley, was thinner. People around the family could see it, and they believed it hurt Ashley. It is the kind of ordinary childhood wound that no one thinks about twice until someone, years on, goes looking for a story to tell about who in the house might have wanted a man dead. By the end of the 1990s, the marriage was fraying. Friends later said Stacy had quietly begun asking about divorce, even gotten the name of an attorney, but held off because of the holidays. And then, in the winter of 2000, Michael Wallace got sick. It came in waves. He felt unsteady. He was coughing. He was unwell in ways that didn't quite add up. At one point, he reportedly felt drunk without having had anything to drink. He spent days in bed, struggling to walk, struggling to talk. It was Ashley, home alone with him, who watched him in his final hours, making what she thought at first were funny faces on the couch. She left to pick up her sister from school. By the time she was gone, her father was dying. In January of 2000, Michael Wallace died. He was 38 years old. Doctors attributed it to a heart attack. There was no autopsy. Stacy told them it wasn't needed, and they did not press. She collected on his life insurance, a payout later established in court at $50,000, paid for the funeral, settled some family debt, and took her daughters to Disney World. At the time, no one questioned any of it. A young father with a history of hard living had died too soon. It was sad, and it was, as far as anyone knew, over. What no one knew, could not have known, was that the calcium oxalate crystals, ethylene glycol deposits in the organs do not dissolve. They remain long after everything else is gone. They were there still when Michael Wallace's body was pulled from the ground 7 years later. The poison had been waiting all along. Within a few years, Stacy had married again. David Castor ran his own heating and air conditioning company in the Syracuse area. Liverpool Heating and Air Conditioning. He was a hard worker and an outdoorsman, a man with snowmobiles and four-wheelers and a boat who hunted and kept a shotgun under his bed. He had been married before to his high school sweetheart and had a grown son, David Castor Jr. He hired Stacy to work in his office. The two grew close, and in August of 2003, they married. Stacy took his name. For David, a man married once before, this was a second chance at the kind of settled life people hope for the first time and rarely expect twice. But blending the two households was not seamless. Stacy's daughters, Ashley and Bree, had spent years with their mother, almost entirely to themselves. 3 women in one house after Michael's death, a tight unit of dinners and trips and long conversations. David came with rules and expectations, and the girls, by their own account, bristled at being told what to do by a man who sometimes said he didn't want to be their father, and other times tried to act like one. There was friction, the ordinary friction of a step family finding its footing. None of it, on its own, looked like anything more than that. For the people who knew David, he was the last man on earth who would harm himself. His son didn't believe it. His ex-wife didn't believe it. His sister, who knew that David understood through his own trade exactly what antifreeze does to a body, didn't believe it for a moment. That conviction, the simple human certainty of the people who loved him, is what kept the case alive when the official paperwork was ready to close it. On a Sunday in late August of 2005, Stacey Castor called the authorities to report that something was wrong with David. According to the account she gave, the couple had argued on Friday night. She said David had told her to leave, to take her kids and get out, and she said that since 5 o'clock that Sunday morning, he had locked himself in their bedroom and would not answer the door, the phone, or her.
I bang on the door, don't get any response. I kick the door in.
We walked into the bedroom, and I observed David lying on his stomach across the bed.
And she asked me if he's okay. And all I said was, no, he's not.
David Castor was dead, and had been for some time. On the nightstand sat an apricot brandy bottle, a bottle of cranberry juice, and 2 glasses, one of them holding a strange, bright green liquid. Nearby was a jug of antifreeze with the cap off. The shotgun was still under the bed, untouched. The county's first reading of the scene was suicide, a despondent man who, after a fight with his wife, had poisoned himself with ethylene glycol. It was a plausible reading. David's father had recently died. Stacy told investigators he had been stressed about his business, that he hadn't been happy, that she feared something like this. The medical examiner's office signed off, and had it stopped there, that would have been the end of David Castor's story. He would have become a sad statistic. Another middle-aged man who chose a terrible, slow way to leave. The people who loved him would not allow it to stay that way. But it didn't stop there, for two reasons. The first was the people who loved David, who would not accept that he had killed himself, and who kept calling. The second was a detail that detectives could not explain away.
She seemed nervous, she was pacing, and she just was surprised that we were there.
Investigators began sending the physical evidence to the lab. The antifreeze bottle, the brandy bottle, the glasses. And the first result back changed everything. The glass with the green liquid had 3 fingerprints on it. All 3 belonged to Stacey Castor. There were none from David at all. A man supposedly drinking himself to death had left no prints on his own poison. The only prints belonged to his wife. The detective allowed the innocent explanation. Perhaps she had placed the glass there from the dishwasher, but he could not allow the next thing they found. In the kitchen trash, beneath a few pieces of paper, detectives found a turkey basta. It smelled of alcohol. When they pulled the rubber bulb off the end and smelled it, the liquid inside smelled like some kind of alcohol. They tested it. The tip carried David Castor's DNA. From that single object, investigators built a theory that is, even now, difficult to say out loud, that the first dose of poison had not killed David fast enough, and that the baster had been used to force more of it into a dying man. That theory of the baster, the force feeding, is the prosecution's interpretation of the physical evidence, not something any witness watched happen. The defense offered its own innocent reading, but the object was real, the DNA was real, and the picture it suggested was impossible to ignore. There is a moment some investigators describe as the one that turned a suspicious death into something far larger. At David Castor's burial, a detective noticed the plot beside him. It belonged to Michael Wallace, Stacy's first husband, dead 5 years earlier. The heart attack at 38, the case no one had ever questioned. 2 husbands, 2 sudden deaths, lying side by side, and a single, quiet, terrible question began to form. Had Michael Wallace really died of natural causes at all? To answer it, they would have to do something that is never done lightly. In September of 2007, investigators exhumed Michael Wallace's body. The pathologist examined what remained, and the finding was unambiguous.
It said, guess what I found? He's loaded with crystals. When you are poisoned with antifreeze, crystals form in your organs, and they don't ever go away. So that was like a big, yeah, we got her. Awesome.
I knew at that point we had a double homicide, and Stacey Castor.
Michael Wallace's tissues were loaded with the calcium oxalate crystals that ethylene glycol leaves behind as it destroys the organs. The same poison, the same method. The heart attack had never been a heart attack. Stacey Castor was never charged in Michael's death, but what the exhumation proved was that David Castor's death was not a tragedy that had happened once. It was a pattern. Now the investigation tightened. After the failed interview, detectives did not arrest Stacey Castor. They watched her. They obtained wiretaps on her phones and put cameras outside her house to track her comings and goings. They even placed a camera at the cemetery to see whether she would ever visit the graves of the 2 men buried side by side. Over the days that followed, she made call after call, agitated, insisting to whoever would listen that the police had it wrong, that she hadn't done this. When she learned that Michael's body had been pulled from the ground, she drove out to the cemetery to see it for herself, and the surveillance caught her distress that the grave had been disturbed. Meanwhile, detectives were filling in the shape of her motive. After Michael, there had been the insurance money. After David, there was his estate, and a will that cut out his own son and left everything to Stacy. Investigators came to believe it was forged. She had persuaded 2 friends, Paul and Lynn Pulaski, to sign as witnesses to a document that had been backdated to before David's death. She had needed witnesses for that document. So she turned to 2 friends, Paul and Lynn Pulaski, and persuaded them to sign as witnesses to a will that had been backdated, signed in reality about a month after David was already dead. It was the kind of detail that, once unraveled, doesn't just suggest guilt, it suggests planning. In September of 2007, with the exhumation done and the forensics mounting, detectives sat Stacey Castor down for a second interview. She'd thought the investigation was over. When they arrived at her door to request it, she told them it felt like David's hand reaching out from the grave. She seemed nervous, pacing. They brought her into an interview room at the sheriff's headquarters and walked her back through the night David died. They returned to the 2 glasses from the bedroom, the one that had held antifreeze and the one with traces of cranberry juice. They asked her simply which glass she had poured the cranberry juice into, and Stacey Castor answered with the words that would follow her for the rest of her life.
And I looked at her and said, "But you said antifreeze." And she said, "You know, I don't like this. You're trying to frame me. You're trying to pin this on me, and I'm done." And she stopped the interview.
And she just said, "That's it, I'm done, I want an attorney."
She corrected herself at once, but there was no innocent reason to put the words, "I poured the antifreeze" in her own mouth. To the detective across the table, the slip confirmed what the fingerprints and the baster and the exhumed body had been saying all along, and Stacy seemed to know it too. She accused them of framing her, said she was done, demanded an attorney, and stood to leave. As the detective gathered his folder, a photograph slid to the top of the pile, the turkey baster. She peered at it and asked what it was. He told her not to worry about it. The interview was over. Within days, surveillance on Stacy intensified. Detectives believed she understood now that the case was closing around her. What they did not anticipate was what she would do next. Here, the story turns into something even darker than a double murder, because by the autumn of 2007, Stacey Castor understood that the case was closing in. And rather than face it, prosecutors say, she decided to hand investigators a culprit, one who could not contradict her because she would not survive to try. That person was her own daughter. Ashley Wallace was 20 years old. She had lost her father, Michael, as a child. She had stood beside her mother through David's death and the long investigation that followed. She trusted Stacy completely. She would later say that her mother had been her best friend. Over 2 evenings in September, prosecutors say Stacy invited Ashley to drink with her, and Ashley, trusting her mother with her life, accepted. What went into those drinks was a lethal combination of crushed pills and alcohol, enough to kill her.
And she says,
"We've had a rough week, let's just get drunk."
and you thought,
I was like, cool, you know? What kind of teenager wouldn't think that was awesome? Your parents just gave you permission to drink. Sweet.
She wakes up, got a little hangover, goes back to school, comes back. Mom again says, let's drink, but this time let's get really drunk.
and this time Ashley says, Mom, it's not even noon yet. And she says, oh, it'll be noon by the time we're drinking.
On the morning after, it was Ashley's younger sister, Bree, who came home and found her. Ashley was unconscious, barely alive. Beside her was a typed letter, more than 700 words long, signed in Ashley's name. In it, Ashley confessed to everything, to killing her own father, Michael, and to killing her stepfather, David. The letter was meant to read as a young woman's suicide and final confession, the tidy end to the whole investigation. There was only one problem. Ashley had not written a single word of it. Investigators found drafts of the note on the family computer, composed days earlier, while Ashley was at school and could not possibly have typed them. The letter referred to a detail about Michael Wallace's death that, the courts would later note, could only have been known to the person who actually killed him. And it misspelled the word antifreeze repeatedly as anti-free, the very same way Stacey Castor had said it out loud in her interrogation. The confession written to damn Ashley pointed, in every particular, back to her mother. There was something else. The note tried to explain Ashley's supposed motive for killing Michael Wallace by implying he had favored Bree over her as a child. That much was true. People around the family had seen it. But it was the kind of truth that could only be known from inside the home, from someone who had watched the dynamic play out up close, not from Ashley, who had, by her own account, loved her father. The note knew too much about the family and too little about Ashley. By several accounts, Stacy had not even intended to call for help. It was Bree's arrival, Bree's discovery of her sister, that forced the 911 call. Ashley was rushed to the hospital. Doctors said she had been minutes from death, but she lived. And in living, she became the one witness who could dismantle her mother's entire defense. Stacy had planned for Ashley to be dead. The plan required it. Stacey Castor was charged with murdering David Castor, attempting to murder Ashley and forging the will. She pleaded not guilty and took the witness stand in her own defense. The prosecution laid out the full pattern: the identical poison used twice, the fingerprints, the baster, the slip, and the daughter framed with a letter she had never written. The jury also heard about Michael Wallace's death, not as a charged crime, but as evidence of a signature method. Fitzpatrick described antifreeze as a substance with a sweet taste, easily disguised in a drink, one that kills slowly and painfully as crystals form in the organs, shutting down the kidneys, the liver, the heart. It was, he told the jury, a horrific way to die, and almost no one chooses it for themselves. On the stand, Stacy's own words turned on her. Under cross-examination, she indicated she had assumed a sound in the house. That morning was her daughter Ashley, yet also claimed she didn't know David was in their bed near death. The prosecutor pressed the contradiction. The story could not hold both things at once.
You actually said in your testimony yesterday, you said, David was in bed. I assumed it was Ashley. How did you know David was in bed?
It's where he was when I left him last.
Couldn't he have gotten up?
Sure.
So then why did you say David was in bed?
That's where I believed him to be.
Because you knew he was in bed, because you'd been poisoning him from Friday night onward, hadn't you?
No, sir.
At sentencing, Ashley stood and addressed her mother directly. What she said was not tidy.
She killed 2 people and tried to kill me and blame it on me and blame me for the other deaths. I hate my mother for ruining so many people's lives. I didn't even know why she did it. What gave her the right to play God with people? And I hate her for having me be the one that found my dad, just like her for having Bree found me. I never knew what hate was until now. Even though I do hate her, I still love her at the same time. That bothers me. It's so confusing. She was my best friend and she took that all away just because she got scared. I just want to sleep one night without thinking about this. I'm not an angry person and I hate being mad at her. I want to forgive her, but I'm not sure if I can. I just hope God can forgive her. She has to listen to me this time. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye, and this will be the last time I get a chance. As horrible as it makes me feel, this is goodbye, Mom. As hard as you tried, I survived, and I will survive because now I'm surrounded by people that love me.
After 4 weeks of trial, the jury returned.
As to count number 1, murder in the second degree, what is the verdict? On count 2, attempted murder in the second degree, what's the verdict? And on count 3, offering a false instrument in the first degree, what is the jury's verdict? All right. Do you wish the jury poll, Bill? Chuck?
Yes, Judge.
All right. Kelly, go ahead.
Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 51 1/3 years to life. Parole eligibility in her late 80s. He told her she stood in a category by herself. Fitzpatrick said that if there was a ceiling for evil, she had reached it. David Castor's son sued over the forged will. The civil judge called the murder wanton and diabolical.
He called Stacey Castor's murder of her husband wanton and diabolical and wrote, "It is obvious that defendants Pulaski were not innocent pawns. They knew what they were doing was wrong."
Stacy never admitted to anything. Her conviction was upheld on appeal in 2012. In June 2016, she was found dead in her cell at Bedford Hills. She was 48. The cause was a heart attack. the same cause of death that had once been written, falsely, on Michael Wallace's certificate. There was no foul play. The person at the center of this case was never Stacey Castor. It was the daughter who lost her father as a child, nearly lost her life at 20, and survived a letter written to brand her a murderer. At sentencing, she found the one word that said exactly what had been done to her.
I'm going to do good things in this world, despite making me, in every sense of the word, an orphan.
An orphan with both parents technically accounted for, one in the ground, one in a cell. She said she would survive because she was surrounded by people who loved her. By every account since, she has.